Hello and welcome to Fade to PB8. In this episode, we'll be coloring in Link from The Legend of Zelda, and he is fighting a monster in a volcano area with some dark red clouds in the background. So I'll go ahead and rewind, start from the beginning, and I'll walk you through step by step, kind of my thought process, some things maybe I would have done a little bit differently, some areas I messed up, and how I corrected them. Hope you enjoy. Thank you. So, as I do in most of my drawings, I start with the background. Here I'm starting with the clouds, and I want to have a kind of a gradient. I want it to be kind of lighter across the horizon, so the further it is from us, I want it to be lighter, and as you get towards the top of the page, as it's closer to us, it's going to be slightly darker. So I'm using red grays for this. I'll be using red grays a lot throughout the entire drawing. Those are kind of my common colors that are going to help bring everything together. You know, when I draw in Link with just normal colors, he ends up popping out of the screen a little bit too much. But then I go over with the red grays, and he'll look like he fits in with the background and everything. So, as I'm doing the clouds, I like to go light to dark, and I like to get everything wet with the lighter markers. And I might just use the lightest marker just with the sole purpose of getting the paper wet. Like, I know I'm going to go over everything with the darker marker, but sometimes I just use that lightest marker just to get the paper wet and just to make blending a little bit easier for me. So I step it down, or step it up in darkness, I should say, as I go from light to dark. And I just want the top of the clouds to be lighter, and then each cloud will kind of have its own gradient, and it'll kind of get a little bit darker as it approaches the next cloud as you go down the page. But again, I want the clouds at the top to be a little bit darker than the clouds at the bottom. So I generally use the brush tip versus the chisel tip. I find the brush tip is just a lot easier for blending. I think they both apply ink pretty well, but as far as blending goes, the brush tip definitely wins. What I do like about the chisel tip, though, is that it can take a beating. I've never had to replace a chisel tip, whereas the brush tips, they kind of wear out in a short period of time. And yeah, you can flip them around and use the other end, but still, you're going to end up kind of damaging the brush tip, pretty much no matter what you're doing. Every single time you use it, you're going to be damaging it a little bit, especially when you push pretty hard. So for the sky here, I go with a yellow gray, and I didn't really like that too much, so I eventually come back over with a red gray, and I think I do that a little bit later. And for these mountains here, I'm going to use the red grays again, just get everything started with the red grays so it kind of blends in with the background. But then I'm going to come in with kind of like a reddish brown a little bit later. And actually, I kind of mess up a little bit. So what I do is I finish all the rocks and the mountains, and I let it dry. And I wasn't terribly happy with the way it looked, but the paper was pretty wet, and quite frankly, I was just a little exhausted. So I took a break, I let it dry, I came back, and I ended up going over it again to improve it. Now, it's kind of neat. What you can do is actually just kind of fast forward and rewind and kind of compare what this image looks like now versus what it looks like 5 minutes from now, which is sped up 10 times. And then you can just kind of go back and forth and see, hey, this is what this end result looks like. And a lot of these colors that you see right now, you're not going to see at the end at all, because I'm going to end up going over it with like a reddish brown. So I like to, when I go, I start everything with the lightest marker, and I just go over everything. I just get it wet. But then when I bring in a darker marker, even if it's the second lightest marker, it's still technically darker, I will add that to what I consider to be probably the darkest area of whatever section I'm working on. So when I bring in that next red gray, I add it to a shadow area that I know isn't going to get the light. So it's going to have a shadow. And that's always a really safe bet, to add a new color to what you consider the darkest area, because chances are you're going to go over that area again with a different color, a darker color, and that original that color that you're putting down is probably just going to disappear on you. So it's a good way to experiment with a color, with a new color, just to kind of see what it's going to look like. But yeah, you just want to you want to like you want to be able to experiment, and you want to be able to make mistakes, and you want to be able to recover from those mistakes. I mean, this drawing took me maybe about 3 hours. And yeah, I made some mistakes, but like through experience and practice, I think I figured out how to kind of correct a lot of those mistakes. Now here in these mountains, I went a little too dark in the back with that dark brown, and I ended up kind of using the chisel tip of like a light red gray to go over it, and you kind of push in with the chisel tip. You gotta be careful not to damage the paper though, but the chisel tip can actually lighten the ink quite a bit. But the key thing is that the ink on the paper has to be wet. If you're going to try to lighten up the ink on the paper, it really has to be wet. Once it dries up, it's kind of game over. You're not going to be able to really lighten it up at all. But what you can do, if it dries up and you realize that area is too dark, what you can do is make everything else around it a little bit darker. But that's kind of a last resort, and we're going to try to avoid doing that. So as I'm working these rocks and mountains, you can see I have a palette on the side, and I kind of have a few different small mini palettes of different colors. And what I kind of do is kind of jump back and forth between the lightest colors, and then I jump back and forth between the second lightest colors, and then jump back and forth between the third lightest colors, and it creates this kind of like a gradient, and it makes it so the colors aren't monotone, so nothing appears to be flat. And I'm just kind of working with the lines that are given to me, always starting with the darkest area when I add a new marker, just to see what it looks like. And then, yeah, I think it's just the safest approach, a very safe approach. So I use 60-pound weight paper for this. I find that printer paper is just too thin, and it can be damaged, especially by the chisel tip, and you can only put a few layers down before it's fully saturated. And while we really like wet paper, we don't want it to be fully saturated. So 60 pound to 80 pound I have found is like a really good number. Now sometimes you make a mistake, and right now I am in the middle of making a mistake. I used a marker that I don't like. It's too dark, it's too red, and it just doesn't really fit in with everything else. But you know what? I didn't just do one rock and then stop with that marker. I continued with that mistake. Okay, so if you use the wrong marker somewhere and you think you're able to correct it, you want to still follow those same steps everywhere for that section that you're doing. So I added that dark marker in a place I didn't like. Well, guess what? The ink's already on the paper. So I'm just going to continue that mistake. I'm going to apply it to different areas that should have about the same shadow, same exposure to the light source, which is on the left side, by the way, not the right side. I normally do right side because I'm right-handed, but I decided to go left side this time because the monster is kind of faced to the left. So yeah, the ground looks okay, but I just don't like how the mountains in the back are kind of the same color as the rocks up front. And like I said, I come back a little bit later, or I had actually come back. Sorry, so it skipped. It transitioned from that break that I did, but I did end up coming back over with some of those markers to correct it, even after it dried. For this temple, I started with the lightest marker, and the key thing was I just want all the colors to go together. So it's a good idea to have a lot of common colors, and I use like those common red grays quite a bit. And what I'll kind of do is color in my area with the palette that I choose, not with the red grays. So I'll color it in with those browns and whatever colors I've chosen. And then when I'm pretty satisfied with how it looks, then I come in with the red grays. I can continue to shade with the red grays, but I want to go over everything and just make sure it kind of fits in with its surroundings. I think that's one of the bigger challenges that you have, like when you look at works of art from other people, is that does it look like everything goes together? I mean, is the tone right? Is the shading right? Are the shadows right? And I think that's a big challenge. It's just making sure that like everything looks like it's in its natural environment. So I think this image was originally supposed to be water. I'm not sure, but I decided to make it lava. And I use three different colors for the lava, and I started with a light red. Might even be a little bit too light, but and then I would kind of work in these two other colors. Pretty much at all costs, I'm trying to avoid using just one color. The only time I ever use one color is if like I'm working on a really small area, maybe like an eyeball, or maybe if I'm doing something really, really thin, like a rope or a pole that's kind of off in the distance, where you just don't have any room to shade. But that's fine. So I want you to notice on this monster, I do the helmet in kind of like this yellow, goldish color, and notice how it just doesn't blend in with everything around it. It's too bright, it's too much. But then when I'm all satisfied with the shading and everything that I've applied with the yellow and orangish markers, I come back in with the red grays, and I think I do this a little bit later, and it really, really, really brings all the colors together. And it's so simple to go over everything with the red grays. You can do a little bit of shading if you want, if it seems necessary, but you can really do all your shading with the yellow markers here, and then just go over it once with one red gray, maybe two red grays. So sometimes I use a hair dryer to let things dry, to dry things off a little bit quicker. The reason why I do that is, well, I really like wet paper. I think it's easier to blend, it's easier to make mistakes, you can go lighter. I mean, wet paper is just better in like almost every single way. But sometimes it gets a little too wet, and you don't want to fully saturate the paper because then the ink will start to bleed, things will become monotone, it just won't blend properly. So what you can do is you can dry it off with a hair dryer. Just make sure that you don't dry it 100% with the hair dryer. Dry it like 90% and then just let the rest air dry. Otherwise you could damage the paper. You could like burn it, for example. Or just air dry, or maybe even just work on a different section. But then you come back, let it dry a little bit, and then come back and make your changes. So it's really easy to make that mistake, particularly on faces that are kind of small, because like skin tones, you tend to use a lot of different colors, and if the face is kind of small, you end up applying layer after layer after layer in a small period of time. And we just want to be careful that we pace ourselves properly. I kind of like working in larger areas. Like when I did all the clouds, I was never really worried about oversaturating the paper, because that took some time. In fact, I was kind of worried about the ink drying on me. So yeah, I think now sometimes people like to section parts off. If I was doing the clouds, some people might want to section off the clouds, do like the left half and then the right half. I prefer to do it all at once, and that's because you have to follow the same steps throughout that section for it to all be consistent with each other. If I had done the left clouds first and then I came to the right clouds, it would be hard to make them look exactly alike, because I would have to follow the same exact steps, and there might be 20 or 30 steps, who knows. So with Link here, like I said, I want you to notice how much the color changes. So I color Link in with just the normal colors. You can see my palette on the right there. But once I'm all done with Link, I go back over him with the red grays. And I'll also go over the lava with the red grays at the very, very end. And it just brings everything together very, very nicely. So I'm being really careful with the hair dryer, but I've gone over that tunic a few times. I can see that it's starting to bleed. As soon as it starts to bleed across the lines, that means you're a little bit too wet. So either step away, dry it off, work on a different section, something like that. So this is supposed to be Link throwing a boomerang at a monster. And you might notice this shield is a little bit different. And the truth is that this image is AI generated. I use a website called Color Bliss. It's a ton of fun, and you can create your own coloring pages. Basically, just type in a prompt, and I think what I typed in here was Link from Legend of Zelda fighting a monster, and this is what it came up with. But it's not perfect, so you'll notice that his shield is not the Hylian shield. It looks a little bit different. I made it look more like the mirror shield from Majora's Mask, although I did like a gray outline instead of red. And then for the boomerang, I just use some browns that I haven't used before. I don't like to reuse the same colors unless they're common colors, which are meant to bring everything together, like the red grays. But I really don't like to reuse the same colors unless I really just have to, and it just makes the most amount of sense. I think actually here I might have used the same yellow for his hair as I did for the monster's helmet, but that's about it. Like, the boots are a different brown from the boomerang, or a different brown from the rocks. The red of his tongue is different from the red of the tunic, is different from the red of the lava. So I'm trying to work as many colors in as possible, and it just looks better when you use more colors. I mean, you can challenge yourself and use a smaller palette. You can try mixing things together, but if you're like me, you spoil yourself and you buy the largest marker kit, and and it gives you a lot more options, gives you a lot more freedom. So definitely, if you can afford it, I would recommend it. So that wraps up this drawing. I know I kind of jumped around a little bit, but if you follow some of my other videos as well, I kind of go through the same process over and over and over again. Overall, I think this turned out pretty well. I give myself a B+. Maybe could have done a little bit better, fading the mountains in the background. Maybe part of the cloud in the upper right-hand corner got a little too dark. Maybe the sky isn't exactly the right color. Maybe I could use a little bit more red there. But overall, I'm very satisfied with it, and I think it looks really nice. So thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next episode. Thank you.